Broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, good morning, or good evening, as they said in the Truman Show. Welcome to today's webinar. We're going to be presenting the new requirements for training providers and certification bodies, versions 9 and 7 respectively. So my colleagues Jakob Lauholst and Søren Gertje are here today to take you through those things. We, as you can see, we're on camera today, which is a little bit different if you've been to a GWO webinar before. So it's hopefully helpful to see our faces. We'd also like to encourage you to join in with the Q&A at the end. And normally, again, if you've been involved in a GWO webinar, we encourage you to write in your questions into the questions box. That's still perfectly fine. You can also raise your hand using the little hand icon in the attendees box. So there are, at the moment, there's 91 attendees, so it's going to be a pretty busy webinar. So we'll do our best to get through to everybody. And I've got a quick point from one person who's unable to hear my audio. I think we're okay. The other panelists can hear my audio, and so I'm not sure if that participant, perhaps you need to restart your system. But if anybody else has a problem with hearing the presenter's audio, please let us know. So we'll go through the presentation. It should take 20, 25 minutes, and we will have plenty of time for questions afterwards. And we will be giving you control over microphones. We'd like you to introduce yourselves and to say who you are, where you're from, and then actually ask the panel your question directly. So hopefully that will work out fine, and we've got over 100 attendees now, so we'll see how that goes, and hopefully it should be a lively discussion. So on that note, I'm going to hand over to Jakob and Søren, and they'll introduce themselves. Let's go ahead.
Thanks, Ralph. Yeah, so I'm Jakob Lauholst. I'm the CEO of Global Wind Organization. I have a little bit about myself and my background. I'm an associations person. I've been working in associations for well over 20 years, 15 of those in the wind industry. I have a past as a board member of Wind Europe, at the time called European Wind Energy Association, because I was sitting there as a chief operating officer for the Danish Wind Energy Association, where I worked since 2008. And been working for GWO since 2014, around that time, and still proud to be here.
Thanks, Jakob. Søren, your turn.
Yeah, hi everybody. My name is Søren Gertje. I'm the operations manager at Global Wind Organization. I'm also the Audit and Compliance Committee lead, meaning that I'm involved with the updating the governance documents that we're presenting today. I'm also a window development lead, so all the updates and continued operations of the database is also something I'm involved with. I have been with GWO since 2015, so about 5 years now. And I have a varied background, mostly from retail, before joining GWO. And I'm very happy to be here today, talk about our new requirements.
Thanks, Søren. Okay, so Jakob, you're going to present a few slides before Søren goes into the details about the requirements documents themselves, right?
Yes, thank you.
Is the agenda first?
Yeah, so here's the agenda. First, an introduction that I'll go through, a little bit of history just to get us all up to speed on where we are and why we are here today. And then Søren will take you through the new requirements for training providers and the requirements for certification bodies. And at the end, we'll take questions. And as Ralph said, feel free to post your questions in the chat. When we get to the questions time, we'll ask you, each and every one, some of you to post your question in live, so we get more interaction here. Right, next slide, please. So this work and these new requirements versions 7 of the certification body requirements and 9 of the requirements for training providers have been the result of a work of a project team. And I just want to acknowledge the project team who has worked on this since October last year, where we've had a good group going, looking into the details of every page, every section of the requirements, and making sure that we have internal coherence in these documents, and that we also include new new requirements or changed requirements so that reflect what is necessary out there. So thank you to all of you guys who were on this team and helped us create something better than what we used to have. Next, please. So just want to take a little bit into the history of the quality assurance of GWO. As you know, it's pretty much a young organization. We're still building the blocks of this house as we speak, and the latest version of the requirements is part of that journey. And when Søren and I inherited the task to be secretariat for GWO, the standards and the criteria have been published and were open sourced, and they were all out there. So many of you were operating under a couple of documents that were really with no real governance, but still that was a sufficient, and that was what it was needed at the time. Then in 2014 and 15, we first consolidated a list of the certified training providers, simply collecting certificates that we knew were out there. At the time, we had several problems with falsified training certificates and false certification of training centers. So actually training centers who pretty much photoshopped their own certificates, or trained persons who were never trained but had photoshopped their own certificates. And we did, whenever we found cases like that, we had to go through very grueling and difficult investigations done by our membership, by their local branch officers, and shortlisting or blacklisting, and that was really not the ideal situation. In 2016, we launched WINDA, and this was a collaboration between Renewable UK and GWO. And when we launched WINDA, we had a means of controlling who are the training providers, who can issue a certificate, who are the training records. It meant that we now knew who were out there who were actually certified by auditors. And we now could identify exactly who is it that has a valid certificate of training. And so that was a huge step forward. And we found at the time 160 training providers who had a valid certificate from a certification body and had been audited, and we could register in WINDA. So that was really the start of where we had some sort of governance to this system. But that's no more than 4 years ago. Just want to remember that. Now, in the past 2 years, we have made a few improvements to the system, and we're going to do this step by step. So we created the auditor qualification training, to whom a lot of you who are on this call today have been part of, as an alternative to witnessing training as an auditor prior to your audit. We've also created a mandatory registry of auditors and your qualifications, what allows you to do audits on our behalf. And in that period, the number of certified training providers has grown to more than double, to 354 at the count end of year 2019, and with a little more than 89,000 individuals with valid training records. So quite a good story, and something that we're certainly proud of, that we're part of, and lucky to be part of this this adventure. In the recent and the requirements that we came out with yesterday, we're doing a couple of new things, and this is all in that journey towards a situation where we are better able, as a scheme, with our scheme governance, to minimize the risks things going wrong out there, from dealing with false certificates. Now we're in a situation where we can begin to look at how can we improve the quality of audits, thereby improving the quality of training. How can we collect more evidence and knowledge from auditors and from trainers into what are the things that are difficult and what goes wrong, and so that we can help as a scheme to improve the quality of training out there. And that's where we are right now. And that's the spirit that we're trying to put into these documents. And so there's a couple of new things, and Søren will go into all of the details for this. I want to say though that we have in our plan, since auditor qualification training is going to be a mandatory requirement as of April 21st, we had in our plan to deliver this training in 8 to 12 key markets this year. And many of you know that this has been postponed, and we do not have anything planned until September due to the COVID situation. Nobody can travel. And one of our mitigating measures for this is that we will carry on some when we get to a situation where we can travel again. But we're also developing an online version of AQT so that we can make sure that you can all meet this requirement, and that it will not be a bottleneck to participate in AQT as an auditor. And we have also, one of the reasons that we are a little bit later than we should have been, normally we would come up with new versions on the 1st of the month of April. And we are delayed because we allowed ourselves time in the face of the pandemic and to look at the documents an extra time and see are there things that we need to fast track so that we can put in place some measures that can help the community cope with the situation, and that's what we've done for training providers. We are putting in measures for delivering training partially as digital delivery. For training providers, we have also issued a temporary standard that is based on virtual classrooms and online training as a measure that you can be audited against. And for auditors, which is also important for you training providers, we have put in measures for remote auditing for all of you who are already certified. So your surveillance, scheduled surveillance audits and scheduled recertifications can happen now remotely. And these things are put in as an interim measure, trailing the experience, and we'll evaluate at the end of the year what works, what can be improved, but certainly the intention is that it's here to stay. These measures. I guess with that, Søren, I'll leave it to you to go into the details of the two documents. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you very much, Jakob. Yeah, so well, let's get right into it, starting with the requirements for training providers version 9. Next slide, please. The document has received a very, very large update. And I have selected a few things to talk about today. Unfortunately, there's not going to be enough time to go in depth with every single point in the document, but at least the key points is something I would like to dive a little deeper into. Both documents are already available on globalwindsafety.org, so if you haven't had a chance to get them yet, now's your chance, and they'll be there under training providers and under certification bodies respectively. So for training providers, the first thing you'll notice is that the document has received a name change. It's no longer called the criteria for training providers, but instead is the requirements for training providers. And the name change is to reflect a more proper naming convention, as it is in fact a requirement document with a number of criteria to which training providers are audited. The format and layout of the document has also been updated to align with other documents that we have, such as the training standards. We have also updated the list of terms and definitions to help read the document and avoid any confusion on what is actually meant when we say shall, must, can, and so on. We have also rearranged the document in order to better follow the process itself to go through an audit. And I believe that this provides an easier reading experience, but also a more natural step-by-step approach to reading the document. In all of our training standards, we have about 20 pages at the start of each document, which is shared across all of them. These 20 pages, they specify validity periods, performance assessment, document control, and many other things. So instead of having them in every single standard, we have taken these 20 pages and put into the new requirements for training providers. So they're gathered in one place, and they will then be phased out from the different training standards over the next review cycle. That way we avoid unnecessary duplication and redundancy. A major thing here is that we're also beginning to phase out the word delegate. This has been a key word for us in describing a person attending training in a GWO module, and we're instead replacing delegate with the word course participant. The reason behind this is our effort to ensure a global alignment as well as understanding of our standards and requirements consistently across. In addition to these changes, I would like to dig a little deeper into specifically two new changes. One is the digital learning section, and the other is the update to incident reporting, including the addition of an incident reporting annex. So next slide, please. Starting with digital learning, we're actually taking a small loop around that by talking very briefly about training settings. We do that because we've now included digital learning as a setting in which you receive training. For the fixed training facilities, we have simplified the description of these with no real changes to the definition. Similarly with the mobile training facilities and the on-site training facilities. However, for on-site training, we are now increasing the requirement to this as sampling is not allowed, and every 12 months a full recertification of the on-site capabilities must take place. The reason behind this is because risk identification and mitigation is key when delivering training in new environments, and we want to enable training providers to deliver GWO training in a more dynamic setting, but we want to ensure that proper risk mitigation is in place and adhered to for every on-site training carried out. Now finally we reach the last training setting, which is our newest addition, digital learning. Now digital learning may be used by already GWO certified training providers, which means that training providers that have already been certified to operate a fixed or mobile training site can, through a certificate extension following an audit, offer digital learning, while new training providers will need to also be certified to fixed or mobile training if they wish to offer digital learning. They can do this simultaneously. Next slide, please. So just talking about the motivation behind this initiative, digitalization is a natural element for the wind industry. We've had discussions internally in the Secretariat on how to implement digital learning for a while. However, the current situation with the coronavirus, which has put travel restrictions, social distancing, and forced closure of training providers in place, it's been very, very difficult, if not downright impossible, to carry out practical training in many parts of the world. So our response to this has therefore been to concentrate our efforts in being able to deliver a solution to offer digital learning, which will enable course participants to attend training, even if they're not physically present. As part of this solution, we also released the BSTRP training standard, which is a digital version of the BSTR standard that can be delivered online. We will not be covering the integral part of the BSTRP today, but I'll talk a bit about the audit for it at the end of my presentation here. There's also a webinar on it last week, which is available on our website. Without going into full detail about every single requirement for offering digital learning, the idea behind it is for training providers themselves to develop a program compliant with the training standard that offers bigger or smaller parts of the standard as a digital solution. And this must then be done while ensuring that any digital solution offers as close as possible a real work scenario. How much or how little of the standard can be digital learning is up to the individual training provider, as long as compliance with the specific training standard can be met. This also means that the scope for an audit to deliver digital learning depends on the scope of digital learning delivered. If you include the entire module as digital learning, including, for instance, virtual reality for practical exercises, the scope of the audit is naturally bigger than if you solely focus on delivering the theoretical elements. If you do decide to have theory part and practical parts separate, then the practical part must be done within 4 weeks of the digital part. Next slide, please. Talking about incident reporting. If incidents occurs during training in a GWO module, the training provider is required to inform us if it's defined in the requirements requirements for training fighters. In the old criteria for training fighters, we referred to OSHA's list of recordable injuries, but it was felt that something a bit more descriptive was needed. So we have updated the list of incidents that must be reported to us, along with significant near misses. The definitions themselves are in the requirements document, where you can read specifically what we mean under every single definition. I'd rather talk a bit about the incident reporting templates that we have included in Annex 4. There are 2 report templates that have been developed to help both training fighters and ourselves in receiving incident reports. There has been a bit of doubt about the level of detail needed to be included in a report to us and which methodologies to use. So we have tried to simplify this by developing a report template for the incidents that we then ask training fighters to report to us. We have a report template, as I said, for initial reports, which it is what we must receive at the Secretariat within 24 hours of incident occurrence. And we have a full report template as well, which is what we must receive within 7 days of incident occurrence. If you have a different template, then you're welcome to use it, but the report templates provide the minimum level of information that we must receive should you experience an incident. If you choose to provide more information, that is perfectly fine, but not less, please. This is very briefly some of the key inclusions to the requirement for training fighters that I just briefly wanted to touch upon. I would also like to switch to the requirements for the certification body. So if we go to the next slide, and then the next slide after that, please. So just as with the requirement for training fighters, the requirement for the certification body has also undergone a lot of changes and updates. These updates include a new title, so the document is no longer called criteria for the certification body, but instead requirements for the certification body, using the same reasoning as the aforementioned document. This document has also undergone a format change to align with the rest of our documents and standards, and we have also here included an updated terms and definitions list of what we mean when we say shall, must, may, and so on. We have merged a number of sections to reduce redundancy, and along with changing the chronology to that of the audit process, which I would believe makes for an easier reading experience. Just like with the other document, we have also here replaced any mentioning of the word delegate with course participant. The key changes I would like to touch upon in this document are that we are now making the AQT mandatory, that we have updated the man-day allocation table, and that we have added the section on remote auditing. Next slide, please. As for the AQT, when we introduced this early last year, we set it out as an enduring qualification. But we also knew that we would like to stay in touch with auditors out there and learn from their experience during the audits, while also being better at communicating any update to the requirements from our side. This last year with the AQT has provided a lot of valuable feedback. And one of them is that we are now making this a hard requirement for all auditors starting April 1 next year. That means that after 1st of April 2021, the option for auditors to qualify by witnessing or participating in the specific training module is removed. And the auditor qualification training is now a requirement to have completed in order to offer GWO audits. In addition, we are setting a validity of the AQT for 3 years, as mentioned, that the auditor remains active in conducting GWO audits, in between which means that the auditor must conduct at least 2 audits within a 12-month interval. So if there's no audits in a 12-month interval, then the auditor needs to requalify by taking the AQT again. Next slide, please. Another update we've made to the requirements is the man-day allocation table. We have heard feedback that the table can be difficult to use when assessing training providers with multiple sites, as well as lacking clarity of stage 1 and stage 2 audits. So what we have done is that we have split the table into 2. The first section is for stage 1 audits, stating 1 man-day for review of the 4 processes. Stage 2 is 1 man-day for the 3 first processes, as we have outlined in the table, while training and assessment is dependent on the number of modules included in the scope. We have also changed the wording in training and assessment column to align with the training standards. So instead of saying theory and practical training, it now refers to the correct definitions as assessing training in the domain of knowledge, and the domains of skills and attitude. We have further clarified that the assessment is in all of the module or at least 1 hour in the domain of knowledge, and all of the module or at least 2 hours in the domain of skills and attitude, whichever is the shortest. This phrasing has been included to try to avoid confusion in those cases where the actual training is shorter than 1 or 2 hours. In those cases, you simply have to assess all of it. Next slide, please. We have also updated a bit in the requirements to inform GWO. One of the changes is the certificate lifecycle, which is now 2 years. This has been done in order to align with the sampling intervals, as we already state that no more than 2 years must pass between the auditor assessing all modules. This does not affect any of the current certificates out there, only new certificates or recertification. The same 12 months interval for re-audits mentioned in the requirements for training providers have also been specified here. For on-site training. And we now also ask the certification body to send us the audit report whenever a such report is created. So for initial certification, recertification, or surveillance audits, we would like a copy of the report. And we want this report to learn more about what is happening in training centers and to try to collect data on nonconformities in order to identify problem areas that we need to look into by, for instance, updating the requirements document or the training standard. Is there anything we can learn or make clearer? Next slide, please. Now I want to talk a bit about remote auditing that Jakob also touched upon at the start. So we have included this as a temporary measure for the rest of the year. Again, this has been implemented due to the extraordinary situation we're in. We will evaluate this measure with the GWO Audit and Compliance Committee at the end of the year to see what learning we have gotten and what the future holds for remote auditing for GWO. We have based the requirements on the IAF MD4 2018 document on remote audits, but we have a little flavor of our own to ensure that facilities are visually inspected and the training is assessed in a real-time scenario. So recording or pictures are not allowed. Instead, the auditor must assess training that's being carried out by live video. We ask all auditors as well in the annex to also evaluate this measure and provide their feedback to us on how they rate this measure, again, to provide learning for us. And it's important to note that this is not for initial audits, but for recertification or surveillance audits. Next slide, please. Finally, as promised, to touch a bit upon the BSTRP standard. We have just released the option for training providers to deliver this training prior to completing an audit. In order to do so, there are some requirements that must be met. The training provider must already be certified to deliver the same modules in the BST before they can begin offering the BSTRP training. In addition, the training provider must also comply with the requirements in the section on digital learning that we just touched upon before. Prior to offer the training provider must also have an audit schedule with a certification body to become certified to deliver the BSTRP. So that must be in place before you offer BSTRP training. If there are any non-conformances identified during the audit, then the training provider must implement corrective measures without further expenses for the course participants. That also means, if necessary, to retrain previous course participants. The training provider will have to upload the training records to Windows after a successfully completed audit. So until then, the training provider will have to offer other means of verification of training for the completed training modules.